Are they meant to be Thai, or are they rather generic?
A jungle is a little bit, or a forest is a little bit like, it's a bit like being underwater.
Hello, this is Wazo X Wazo coming to you from Udaipur. Welcome again to Evil O. And today I am having the great fortune to chat with an artist I really like who's coming all the way from Thailand, Mr. Ralph Kiggell. Good morning, Ralph. How are you?
Hello, Waswo. Yes, hello, good morning. I'm talking to you from Thailand.
Yeah, where in Thailand are you currently?
Well, I'm down in the south, Waswo, in a place called Krabi, which people may know. They may know Phuket, which is our neighbouring province, better than Krabi. But so I'm down in the south.
I've been to Krabi. It's a beautiful place. You have some beautiful beaches there. It's a little more quiet than Phuket.
Yes.
So you're lucky.
We're surrounded by beautiful nature and islands and, of course, the beaches. But we've got the mountains, whereas Phuket doesn't have the mountains.
So you are an incredible artist in my mind, and your medium is very much woodcut and printmaking. And I was just watching another video of yours that was online where you're giving an address at, I think it was Bangkok University, in which you were talking about the medium of wood. And I realized you are so much into the whole continuum between the tree and the wood block and making the print, which is of course also on a paper that's made out of wood. You're very fascinated with this whole thing. Do you just want to talk a little bit about your materials?
Yes, well, the materials are very important, and I think that the materials for woodblock printing are very important in the times that we're living in. And I actually gave that talk at Bangkok University, and I gave a similar one at a conference 5 or so years ago in China. And the conference was about print in the post-print era, and it was about using computers and digital this and digital that. And I talked about, don't forget wood as this beautiful medium, because wood reminds us of our connections to nature, and working with wood gives you very special, there's a relationship, there's an ancestral relationship with wood that I really like. So you're right, the materials in the technique that I use are very important.
And you like to show the grain of the wood in your prints. I notice you always see that texture is there, and some woodcut artists don't do that. They cut so heavily, they gouge so heavily the matrix that you kind of lose the sense. You wonder, well, was this made on wood or was it made on some of the more contemporary materials people are using now? But you like to show that grain. Do you want to talk about that?
Well, yes, no, you're right. I mean, depending on how you work with the wood, if you use a lot of pigment or you're more sparing, if your paper is slightly drier or damper, if you're printing in the rainy season or the dry season, or your paper's heavy and so on, you'll get slightly different effects coming off the wood. But I like to exploit the feel of the wood if I can. So you're right, that's very important. And also, sometimes your image may benefit from following the grain of the wood. Wood was a living organism at one point, so it's really beautiful to capture that.
The other thing I gathered from your lecture is that you use non-toxic inks, and you had mentioned that was a long tradition in Japan, that apparently the Japanese always use non-toxic materials as compared to the West.
Yes, that's right. All the materials really in traditional water-based woodblock printing are non-toxic. I mean, there may be some pigments that are a little bit toxic, and I couldn't tell you which ones they are, but the whole process is all the materials are handmade. The paper, the brushes, um, the what else? The baren is a kind of round pad that you use for printing. So you don't use presses. Um, I mean, I imagine, you know, in India there were similar techniques before the
Yeah,
war.
yeah. They still, the art students use that a lot. They call it spooning because sometimes they literally use a spoon.
No, yeah, right.
So,
That's funny. Yeah, I mean, the Japanese have an incredible sensitivity to materials, and everything they make in the for woodblock printing is exquisite in itself. So it's a pleasure. It's a great pleasure to use all those materials. You know, as you're making the woodblock print. I mean, I use my own inventions and I do use some machinery and so on, but I think that intimate relationship between the beautiful handmade Japanese paper, printing by hand, and that pressure, the pressure you apply, the contact between you, the paper, and the wood is very, very, very beautiful. Very beautiful.
now I have a couple of your early works. I have one from your dog series. We haven't talked about that. I really liked your series on dogs. That was early work, I think, for you. Do you want to talk about that at all?
Well, when I first came to Thailand, the first thing I noticed was dogs everywhere. So if you know, if you went into a temple, there were always dogs. And as you drive around Bangkok or the countryside, you see dogs everywhere. And uh, you know, how a society treats its dogs gives you a very good idea of that society. You know, I was just reading about the Victorian obsession with breeding creating new breeds all the time. So in Thailand, I like those kind of skinny, rough dogs, and I that was the first time I used local Thai woods uh, to make those images. And I think the roughness of the wood really was interesting to, you know, give a suggestion of the rough fur of those dogs in Thailand.
Right. It gives that kind of rough and tumble feel to the prints itself that implies the type of dogs they are.
That's
You know,
right. Yeah,
they're street dogs. They're street fighting dogs, basically.
that's right.
And
That's right.
you've captured them in very unique positions,
I mean,
but they're elegant. They're so elegant.
oh, good, 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 good. Mm. I wanted to. I did a series of 6 dogs, and I wanted them to all be in fairly different positions. So, of course, you know, dogs twisting, licking themselves, stretching, that kind of thing. But I wanted to place them. I always think about the design, so I wanted to place those design, let's say, the dog to fit within a square. That's very important, and that's what I like. And
Now
I,
you were teaching for a while in Bangkok, weren't you? When you were based in Bangkok itself, weren't you
yes,
teaching there? Yes.
I was. I taught um, a little bit of woodblock printing at Chulalongkorn University in the paper studio there, and I taught drawing at
Okay.
Bangkok University. Yeah, yeah,
Okay. And now you're full-time artist.
yeah. I'm working from my studio full time, and you know, in this year especially, I think artists have a lot of time to develop their work.
Right.
That's a that's an upside of an otherwise terrible scenario.
Right. Some artists are in very bad financial situations, but if you can struggle by, it's a great time to catch up on your production and your thought processes and even like your archiving,
Exactly.
I'm catching up on the editioning of my photographs and all of this. I mean, there are things to do.
Exactly. I mean, Wazwa, I probably wouldn't have had the time to do this large sequence of prints that I've just finished in Chiang Mai, if this year had been a typical one for me. But
Right.
I had that opportunity suddenly because two French artists couldn't travel to Thailand. So I was able to go up to Thailand, fill a space, and do something that I'd been meaning to do for, 12 years.
So currently you're having an exhibition at what gallery, and what's the name of the exhibition?
Yes, that's right. I'm currently have a show at Toot Yung Art Center, north of Chiang Mai. It's a beautiful, beautiful gallery and space there, and they've got a very long wall. And about 2 or 3 years ago, the director of the art space, Mimi Tibering, said to me, why don't you do something really big on those walls? And I thought to myself, I will. And this year I just had the great opportunity to have some time. So I went up and did it.
Yeah, sometimes the space inspires the show. That's happened to me too. If you've got a wonderful space, you can
Yeah,
sort of see like what opportunities it presents to you.
that's right.
So that's great. So the next thing I want you to do is talk about the show a little bit and talk about that one beautiful woodcut, which is in several panels, which is called The Hunter. To hear about your thought process and your making process in those.
Well, okay. So I'm currently have an exhibition in Chiang Mai at the moment, which is 6 long sheets of handmade Thai paper, which is very exciting. So they're the biggest prints that I've made on one single piece of paper. I do make big prints, but I usually piece them together a bit like tiles. But these were very large pieces of paper. And the theme of the exhibition was the hunter. And the inspiration, perhaps, for this series of prints was a trip I took down the Salween River between Burma and Thailand about 12 years ago, actually. With a friend of mine who lives there. He lived there for 30 or so years amongst the Karen people, a subgroup of Karen people. And it was truly in the middle of nowhere, I felt anyway. It was quite difficult to get to. In the past, my friend would only be able to get to his house by elephant in the I guess it would have been the rainy season. Anyway, so it was a
So it's a
place.
place that was really only accessible by elephant or by river.
That's right, or by
Okay.
yeah. So for me, that was very exciting. It was somewhere that I'd always wanted to go to. The kind of place I always wanted to go to, and I think how to describe that place, but I didn't want to be specific. I wanted to describe the feeling of being in the jungle. I wasn't going to specifically reference the people I met or the plants or anything like that. It was a feeling I had, and that feeling I think would also be something that I'd learned or read about the jungle in the past. And I mean, I wasn't in the jungle, trekking through the jungle or anything like that. I was going into the jungle and then coming out again. So I wasn't absolutely surrounded by it. But I like the way that a jungle is a little bit, or a forest is a little bit like, it's a bit like being underwater. There's a feeling of submersion and
Well, I would imagine there would be a feeling of being totally surrounded by a natural environment, which we're not used to, which would be the equivalent to being underwater.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, and also, when you're in the, let's say when you're in a forest, the light is different. It's dappled, maybe it's a little bit greenish. Of course, it's different to when you're, you know, out in a big open space. And I think that I wanted to capture that kind of feeling in these prints, and I've been thinking about them for a long time. And what people do in the forest and what they get from the forest and the stories that they attribute to the forests. I think that's extremely interesting. I mean, it's an enormous subject, and I don't want to be in my prints. I don't want to be totally specific to one single aspect or story about the jungle. It's my feeling. So in I like the idea of the hunter because you know, our ancestors hundreds of thousands of years ago were hunter-gatherers. So hunting is something that's built into our what makes us human. You
It's
know,
part of our evolutionary biology, I would say,
exactly.
being
You know,
hunters and gatherers. Did you
exactly.
happen to be with anybody who did any actual hunting when you were with them, or no?
No, I didn't. No, I didn't.
Okay, I was
No,
just curious.
no. Although, I mean, I have seen people hunting monkeys in China,
Yeah.
and you know, there are people who live amongst nature. They are they have very very sharp eyesight. They can see birds and animals in where I can't see them. So as I say, I'm not being absolutely specific. So it's my feeling of what hunting is like. And in my print, my figures are floating. So it's as if they're underwater. I don't want them to be weighed down by gravity, and I think that gives the prints that I did in this exhibition a feeling of spaciousness and fluidity and unrealness.
Can you talk about the process of making them? Because I notice you have how many strips, and then each strip is made out of like three impressions, correct?
Yes, because those sheets of paper are so big, and because I'm working with I'm cutting the blocks up with a jigsaw, so it's a it's an extension of traditional woodblock printing. I'm not sticking exactly by how people would have done woodcuts, you know, 100, 200 years ago. Um, and if you've got a really long piece of wood, 2 meters long, and you're trying to cut it up with a jigsaw, it's way too big for a jigsaw, even one with a long arm. So for convenience, if you will, I cut each piece of 2 meter long wood into three pieces, which is exactly the same length as a 2 meter long piece of wood. And the other thing is because I use a water-based method of printing, if I was covering a 2 meter long piece of wood with water-based ink, it's going to dry uh, before I've finished, got to the other end, if you will. So it makes cutting it up into pieces makes it logistically easier to print.
Right.
Yeah, so that's why. And but I don't want to hide that technique. The fact that the long blocks are cut up into three, I like that. I'm not going to hide it. So it uh, gives an extra quality to the finished work.
I also really like the ones in this current exhibition that are the long ones on, I believe, rice paper that are just a solid black, I believe, on paper. And you've got a couple of men, and you've got the one that I always do full disclosure, the one of the dead bird that I've added to my collection.
Yes.
Um, so, do you want to talk about that series at all? That's quite a beautiful graphic series on a graphic level. And did that also evolve from your trip to the jungle?
Well, so yes, very interesting, Weslow. Um, So, if you will, on one in the gallery space, I have got the six very large pieces on one wall, forming almost a continuous frieze, a kind of action shot uh, in the jungle. And then opposite that, I've got four, let's say, quite realistic, almost heroic, quite muscular hunters that I have depicted very simply in with black, Japanese ink, and they come across as very graphic uh, and strong visually, and they kind of match the paper cut figures because on the large prints on the other side, the figures are collaged with black Japanese paper at the end.
Ah, okay.
Yeah. So I had the freedom with the paper cuts and collaging to place the figures where I want after I finish the woodblock. But on the, as I say, that group of four hunters that you mentioned in the dead bird, um, they're more realistic, and they they come across as ultra masculine. Um, and of course, because they're not wearing any clothes, that's not uh, it's not very likely if you're running around in the jungle, you're gonna be wearing something. Uh,
Are they meant to be Thai or are they rather generic? The men. I'm just curious if
um,
they're meant to be Thai.
I made them, let's say, generic. You're right. They're a little bit Western. They're a little bit Pacific. They're a little bit East Asian. Um, yeah, you're right. They're not
But
specific.
they're people in connection with the natural environment,
Yes,
I would say,
each
in
of
some
those
way.
figures has got a knife or a machete or a slingshot. So it's another play on the theme of the hunter. And as you say, there's a dead bird in the middle. So there's hunting is visceral. You come back. It's a
Oh,
chain.
you're not telling me they're a set, are you? Do I have to buy all the others too? No.
Yeah, yeah. You need a big house with a huge
No,
wall.
I don't think so, Ralph. Not so lucky.
Yeah, no, you'd have to have a massive wall.
I was actually surprised you were selling the jungle in pieces. That to me seems like it should be one set. Look like in the
Well,
PDF, but
I mean, ideally they would go as one set,
yeah.
but I mean they're in a little edition of three, so I have the option of breaking up one set and keeping two full sets.
That would be the best idea because
Yeah.
those are really masterworks of yours, I think.
I know, that's right. You're absolutely
And
right.
the other thing I want to talk about is the little series of green ones. I don't know what you call it with the strange little objects that are like one's a seashell and one's a windsock, and there's some strange objects. I'm not sure what they are. Do you want to talk about that series at all?
Well, yes. In the exhibition in Chiang Mai, there's two sections. One section is the hunter, and then there's a little front gallery with a sequence of 12 prints, much smaller, a very similar technique to the hunting figures we were just talking about. A simple black shape on a textured background, with a feeling of the wood grain coming forward. What those 12 shapes are my way of interpreting a decorative shape in Thailand called granok, which uh, ultimately comes from India. And who knows, before that, it may even have come from, may have developed from the acanthus leaf. So it's the idea of some sort of motif representing the flow of ideas internationally. And what I did is I interpreted that motif, that Thai decorative motif, which is a flowing, pointed shape, and I interpret it into 12 shapes that give a little overview of my experience here as a British man living in Thailand. And I wanted to say that I wanted it to be partly about my relevancy in Thailand. I'm not just somebody who's floated in and will float out. You know, I live here. I've lived here for quite a long time.
How many years? How many years have you been living in Thailand, Ralph?
Well, 20.
20 years.
Yeah.
And you speak Thai, yes?
To a certain degree.
Okay.
Not anything like as well as I should or would like
Okay.
to. You know.
But you can get by if you're in the middle of the jungle.
Well, yeah. Yeah, no, yeah, you're right. I hope so. I hope so.
Yeah.
I know I'm sign language there, I think. So yeah, those shapes are, for example, I have a shell, which is a beautiful shell, and it curls up like that. And there's also a very small organism called a radiolarian, which is beautifully pointed. It's in 3 stages, and it looks like a kind of Thai pointed headdress.
It looks like the headdress, yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. But those shapes also, I think, is a very religious shape in Thailand, because you know, the higher you go in Thailand, the more spiritual everything becomes. So you know, when you I should think it's the same in India. You know, the higher you go, the politer it is, and also, you know, in Thailand you don't touch the head, and the feet are the lowest part of, literally the lowest, the basest part of your body. So those shapes, they're kind of big at the bottom, and then they taper. And I also think, as an artist, it's a very beautiful shape, incredibly beautiful.
Oh, they are. They're just beautiful.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
So I think we kind of covered what I wanted to cover. So I'm going to say goodbye.
Goodbye.
But stay signed in so we can still talk, okay?
Oh, sure. Yes.
Okay, so thank you for joining us. This is Evil O from Udaipur speaking with Ralph Kiggell, and talk to you next time. Bye.
Bye. Bye.